Great, great to be with you all this afternoon. Welcome to this session. Today we're going to be exploring how can we activate mainstream messages, how can we activate our messages through mainstream channels. I'm Helen, I'm Executive Director of the Climate Coalition, and I'm going to be chairing this session. And I've really had a long interest in working with popular culture to inspire action. I've been really lucky enough to explore this in a number of ways over the years, from co-producing the feature-length documentary about children's disconnection from nature, or Project Wild Thing, to running an arts programme, the Oak Project, which used culture and creativity to drive nature connection, to more recently living my childhood dream and working alongside a David Attenborough documentary, working on the Save Our Wild Isles campaign with colleagues across RSPB, WWF and the National Trust. So through those different experiences, I've seen both the power and some of the potential pitfalls of using mainstream media to drive change. And that's what we'll be exploring today. But just to say a few words about the power of media. Cultural moments, whether it's film, telly, music, visual art, theatre, literature, they can open the space for change to happen. They allow more stories to be told. They allow people who have the will to seize the moment. There is a brilliant report that speaks to this. It's quite old now, but by the US-based organisation, the Culture Group, report called Making Waves, which sets out a really powerful argument for this model of change. And it draws on evidence from a range of different issues and movements, from marriage equality, civil rights, the Dreamer movement, to show how cultural moments, how mainstream media, whether it's the first Black player in US Major League Baseball, or Taking the Knee, or Ellen DeGeneres coming out on live television, how these moments anticipated and created the opportunity for many political, legal and social changes that followed after. So I'm really excited that we're exploring this exciting topic with you all this afternoon. And I'm delighted to be joined by two brilliant panelists. We've got Lewis Alcott from the University of Bristol and Sophie Kinsella from Forster Communications. But we also just wanted to acknowledge that our third panelist, Lyra, is sadly unwell today and unable to join us. So we all wish her a speedy recovery. We're going to have lots of time for Q&A. I'm going to ask our brilliant panelists a few questions to get the ball rolling, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A from everybody else. There is a Q&A function on Zoom, so just a little bit of housekeeping first. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A function. If you could please add any questions there, that would be fantastic. It allows other folk on the webinar to kind of upvote questions, and it just makes it easier for us to keep track of them. So please do use that. But without further ado, I'm going to pass to our panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Sophie. So Sophie, how did you get into working with mainstream channels?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Helen. So my name's Sophie Kinsella. I am an Associate Director at Forster Communications, and we are a specialist sustainability PR agency, which means everything that we do with our clients is around protecting and improving lives. And obviously the protection of nature is a big part of what we focus on. And through that, we really focus on the kind of mainstream news sort of digital channels. I've been working in communications for about 12 years. And like most people in the communications industry, kind of fell into it and it became a happy accident. It wasn't like I was dreaming of working in PR at 12 years old, because I don't think anyone does that. So I spent my early career working on what I think some people would maybe call your kind of big bad corporates. And that was really interesting work. I learned a lot, worked on some amazing things, communicating to lots of different audiences through lots of different channels. But it really opened my eyes, I guess, to some of the more negative parts of our kind of consumer society. And I thought, hang on, there must be a better way of doing things here. There must be better businesses that I can work with, businesses that are really using their platforms and reach for good and are campaigning for climate action and social change. And that's what led me to Forster, really. It's essentially, that's what we do. We work with businesses, NGOs, membership organisations and UK civil society that drive climate action and social change and social and help social injustice. So looking specifically, I guess, at the kind of popular culture to drive action and the kind of work that I've done before in a previous life, it's not actually nature related, but in a previous sort of agency life, I worked on the This Girl Can campaign. And for those of you who aren't aware, that is a Sport England campaign, which was all around getting more women active. And it was born out of the insight that 3/4 of women face barriers to exercise, whether that's caring responsibilities, it's fear of judgment, it's access or safety. So it was all about getting women active and breaking down those barriers. And one of the channels that we used was partnerships with celebrities and influencers. Um, and we used those people, those women, to directly target the women that we were trying to speak to and communicate to get them more active, to inspire them to be more active. And you might think that with a campaign focused on exercise and activity, that we'd work with people, you know, the kind of high-profile women that were known for exercise, your kind of Davina McCall, Josanna Van Dykes, people who are naturally talking about this anyway. But actually, we were trying to target a kind of a specific set of women who don't, you know, aren't exercising. So it wasn't about women who were talking and posting about exercise. It wasn't those women that we needed to work with. It was the women who aren't doing that, and who you know, who could communicate our message a bit more authentically. Women needed to see this message from This Girl Can around getting active and addressing those barriers that were stopping them from do it, from women who looked like them and had lives like them. And I think that's really crucial in inspiring action in topics like nature. If we want to drive action and change, we really need to look at our audiences and their lives and understand them, understand the channels that influence them, and find a way to engage them through those.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophie. There's loads for us to dig into there. Lewis, can we come to you now?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lewis Alcott. I'm a lecturer in Earth Sciences at the University of Bristol. And I kind of came into this pop culture angle of nature pretty much by accident. During COVID, like many people, we found ourselves stuck at home quite a lot. Maybe not working a full 8-hour day like you probably should have been. And I found myself playing video games more than I ever have, or watching the entirety of the Netflix catalog. And I found myself one day playing a game that was set in this ancient historical setting. And I found myself thinking, oh, is that real or is that not? So I literally just Googled it, and then I ended up trawling through Wikipedia and all sorts, trying to figure out what the inspiration behind some of the creative licenses in the games were. And then I kind of thought, well, surely people must be doing this other than just me. And then once I kind of found out it was a whole variety of different subjects, trying to draw on different pop culture, from video games like I was looking at through to things like literature or really popular films. And there was a bit of a gap in actually using environmental science or natural sciences using these games or movies that are literally off the shelf. So things that you can literally walk into your everyday supermarket and you can buy the game and you can play them and you can try and get an idea as to whether or not you can learn something from them. So that is kind of what I started pulling the threads at, playing a couple of different games, or at least justifying myself playing a couple of different games, and actually trying to figure out whether or not they were telling me something meaningful or not. And then when I found out a bit more about it, I started to think, okay, maybe there's something that might already be playing a role in this other than just games. So I kind of asked myself, okay, if we take the hugely popular franchise of Jurassic Park and we remove that from public consciousness, so we take the entire franchise out, how many people can actually tell you what a T-Rex looks like outside of Jurassic Park? So if you remove the idea of what a T-Rex looks like based on your opinion of Jurassic Park, would you be able to come up with what a T-Rex would look like? And all of a sudden, you start even asking actual Earth scientists, and there's actually not that many people can really tell you that. So I thought, surely there must be something similar with games. And while it's not as strikingly obvious, putting games in a classroom is actually a really fun way to engage not just children, but all the way up to people at undergrad level, so up to the age of more or less 21. just engage them in a fun way to learn a concept. And then digging into that a little bit more and trying to see how widespread these things could be, is that there's over 3 billion people playing video games worldwide, and half of those are female. So you're already hitting a pretty good gender balance right down the middle with video games, as opposed to when you look at earth sciences, the number of people getting doctorates and completing PhDs all the way through is more on the order of 10 to 20% of those people being female. So you have this huge disparity in the people that engage with games and the people that are completing education to a point of no return almost. And then this goes further in the fact that when you look at the racial diversity of people that are getting these doctorates, a large proportion of them are white men, and that's just as it is. However, there's actually a much better racial diversity in terms of gamers and people that are playing these games. So if you can engage people on a variety of scales at different parts of their youth, I guess, then you can actually try and get them excited about the natural world in a way that wouldn't necessarily be possible. So yeah, I play games and convince people to play more of them.
Absolutely fascinating. And you've both given two really, really different examples there, from kind of working with PR and influencers through a big above the line campaign, through kind of the power of gaming. Really inspiring stuff there, Lewis, around kind of the power of gaming to kind of increase equity, diversity, inclusion in earth science. Do you both think, you've both spoken to the kind of potential of using these different channels? Are we, as the nature sector, are we doing enough? Are we being ambitious enough in our use of these channels?
Shall I go first? I guess the short answer is no, I don't think so. I think if we would, there'd be a lot more people taking action on things like nature protection, and maybe we wouldn't be in a crisis. Maybe we wouldn't actually be having this conversation. I think if we were really being ambitious enough. I think to be ambitious enough, we need to look deeper at the audiences that we're trying to engage and inspire to take action, and just understand who they are, where they are, and I think really crucially what motivates them to engage in action and take action, and also the barriers that they face in doing that. And really understanding their lives and what they care about, putting them at the center of it. And I think we can get that wrong in a lot of areas. I think sometimes we can be guilty of making assumptions based on our own experiences, and sometimes seeing the world, expecting people to see the world in the way that we see the world. And people who shop the same as us, vote the same as us, work the same as us, we expect there to be real similarities. I think particularly as us as a kind of industry, it's a real collective, and it feels like everyone's working towards the same cause, which is lovely, but it isn't where I guess the majority of minds are. And I think a great but quite depressing example of that kind of thing is to look at the US elections, and you look at how Trump and Harris communicated with their audiences. Trump was all about that individualism, right down to that granular detail of what the impact on people and on the person. Harris was very much about the collective and all coming together. And I think a lot of us were probably quite hopeful and people would buy into that. I certainly bought into that. But the reality is that the vast majority of people don't. They care about what is impacting them in their lives, and they look at the messages that reflect their lives, really. And I think what we can take from that is where we are as a society right now. People need to see the impact of it on them, understand if we're not going to protect nature, what is the impact on them, for them to take action, and put them at the center of it. And popular culture has a big opportunity there, I think.
Great, thanks, Sophie. How about you, Lewis? Do you think we're being ambitious enough?
From a games media point of view, I would say there's obviously a huge base of people engaging with these things. Like just knowing the word Pokemon is basically everybody knows at least what it is. All the way to the point where people can actually recognize these creatures that are based on real animals that can then get an idea of how they ecologically interact with each other. So the actual use of games as a means to teach people, or use of films as a means to teach people, while people are engaging with it, they're not pointing it out enough. If it was more directed or curated in a way that, yes, these things can benefit you, or at least can help you engage with the natural world, or can highlight or bring attention issues such as sustainability, climate change, and things like that through games, then it is a really nice way to actually highlight those things, but it's literally a case of actually pointing it out as opposed to just being exposed to it.
Great, thank you. So I'm hearing, that, but from both of you, we're probably not being ambitious enough. That we need to be starting much more with where our audiences are at, and also to be sort of telling the stories of how this can work much more. So we talked about some of the positives, and I think we're sort of getting a bit of a feeling that we'd all love to see the nature sector make more use of mainstream channels. But there can be pitfalls as well. So I'd love to hear from you both on what do you think are some of the elephant traps that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about using mainstream media to activate our audiences? And Lewis, if I can start with you this time.
Yeah, there's an obvious one that many people point out as soon as I start talking to them about people that use creative licenses as a way to teach. And it's the fact that they are creative licenses. Directors, game developers, writers, whoever is creating these almost pieces of art in a lot of respects, are using a degree of fantasy in a lot of the things to either make things much more dramatic or much more more of a spectacle. So one of the biggest issues is people dismissing the use of these popular media channels just because they're fanciful in a way. Well, yes, there's going to be some aspects of more or less everything that is going to be almost fake. There's so much that is actually grounded in reality because these ideas of imagination are coming from somewhere. And it's a case of teachers in general, or people engaging with these games and wanting to teach with them, actually pointing those things out as almost like, I use it as a quiz in some way. Like I do it with my own undergraduates of, hey, so this is a screenshot. Do you think it's real or fake? This is a screenshot of a film. Do you think it's real or fake? This is a mini clip. And trying to test their own knowledge as to whether or not they can recognize whether or not things are real or fake. So if anything, really, it's a case of acknowledging that things are useful and not just instantly dismissing them.
Great, thanks, Lewis. How about you, Sophie? What do you think the elephant traps are?
Well, I think the biggest one, certainly in my line of work and industry, is greenwashing. Probably one of the most important rules when you're talking about nature and climate. No matter what channel you're going through, this is getting harder. There's more rules and regulations than there were, ever before to really follow. There's more coming next year. And I think greenwashing is a particular challenge when you're communicating through channels like celebrity and influencers, when there's like an exchange of money to promote a sort of message by an individual, and that exchange of money is quite apparent. People are so much more aware these days, and I think the risk of greenwash there can be really huge. But I also think that we shouldn't really be held back by that. Because there's this risk of greenwashing, so shying away from talking about the progress that we're making, which realistically is probably going to stifle action if we're not talking about it. So I think we can be, there's lots of things we can look at when we're sort of communicating about nature and climate to avoid those risks. Being proportionate, not over-egging where you are, be transparent and honest about where you are, build that trust with audiences. I think is really important. And then obviously the stats, substantiating any claims that you're making. The Green Claims Code is quite a good kind of tool to look at to kind of check back against. And then another one which I touched on already really, but it's around tailoring the message for the audiences and for each channel you're trying to communicate to. If you're trying to engage people or sport fans through working with athletes, and make sure that they're using messaging that's really relevant to them. They shouldn't be regurgitating the corporate messaging. And I think sometimes like organizations and the industries can be a bit guilty of that. It takes so long for these messages to get approved. Then you just any tweak or edit of them can take a long time and go through a lot of sort of chains of command. But if it's not relevant, it won't, and authentic, it won't land with the audience. And you can always tell when people are talking about something that isn't in their voice and isn't relevant to their world. So I think, yeah, the real tailoring of through each channel and through each for each message and each person that you might be working with is really important.
Yeah, that authenticity really matters, isn't it? We recently did some work with sports stars looking at the impact of climate change on grassroots sport, and we had Paul Merson was our lead spokesperson, footballing legend and of Strictly fame. And what was brilliant about Paul was he spoke from the heart. He was talking about his experience growing up in Sunday grassroots football and how that shaped him as a not just as a footballer but as a human, and just that kind of authenticity and passion kind of overrode what could be any kind of potential perceptions of greenwashing or accusations of, well, how can you say this? You're a footballer that's flown around the world for your entire career. And yeah, that authenticity matters, doesn't it?
Totally, and that's what his audience wants to hear from him. He doesn't, a lot of his audience might not want to hear about climate change and things, but actually through that lens, it becomes something that they actually will automatically engage in, and they expect to hear from him.
Yeah, it makes it relatable, doesn't it? So I've got one final question. So for our audience, if you've got any questions, please do use the Q&A function to submit them. But just one final question from me for our panelists. I would love to know from both of you, it's a double question in one really. What's the biggest thing that you've learned through seeking to activate channels, messages through mainstream channels? And or who do you think we can learn from? Who's doing this really well? So Lewis, if I can come to you.
It's a good question. The biggest thing I've learned is that it works, however crazy that sounds. I think just engaging with people in more creative ways, whether that be through like things like advertising or engagement in fun, is useful and it makes a lot of difference. There's been a fair few studies now of people asking a questionnaire before engaging in a film or something like that, and then asking them after, and then seeing that they do learn aspects of the natural world from these things, or at least they, I guess one way to think of it is like subliminally digest the information in a sense. And that's just like a really impressive thing, that even though a lot of these mainstream media productions aren't necessarily aiming for that, the fact that they are engaging and fun causes people to learn from them. And then, yeah, there's a fair few people doing this really well. There's a small corporation of the UN that are putting together this project called Playing for the Planet, where they're actually working with a lot of video game developers to try and raise awareness of sustainability and climate change in the gaming space. And that's not just through an educational lens, but also through acknowledgement that gaming necessarily isn't the most sustainable practice, the most sustainable industry. But from my work, at least, I'm using games that are literally off the shelf or films that are being produced regardless of whether or not they're for educational purposes, and trying to gain some positive light from them for the environment.
Thanks, Lewis. How about you, Sophie? What's the biggest thing you've learned?
So I think the sort of main thing that I always come back to is just to never make assumptions, and have things rooted in sort of research and insight when you're working in mainstream channels. And even more importantly, I think, is using up-to-date insights. The world, I mean, no one needs me to tell them that the world has changed significantly in the last 5 years, and even in the last 1 to 2 years, people's perceptions and what's important to people. We weren't talking about a cost of living crisis sort of 2 3 years ago, and automatically that will shift how people think about nature and how important nature protection is to them if they can't afford their shopping or their energy or their rent. So using up to, meeting people where they are right now, and using insights to help inform kind of what you're doing around that. There's a lot of great work happening that everyone can learn from, both in sort of in the nature sector and outside of it. It's a few years old now, but the one that I come back to quite often is the People's Plan for Nature, which really put people at the heart of it. It was designed by people for people, and you can't argue with that, because that is so critical to inspiring action. And it was a brilliant use of partnerships and bringing together organisations to help achieve that as well. I think looking more recently, the WWF Prescription for Nature campaign, I think, has been brilliant. It's taken nature protection and put a different lens on it outside the usual place you'd expect to engage an audience, and hopefully reaching new audiences as well, helping them understand what nature can give them, when it comes to kind of mental health, and just put a completely different lens on it and makes it relevant to so many different people. And again, great use of celebrity, great activation from it as well, just kind of as a concept. I think if to look really recently and looking outside of nature, the one that I've loved recently is Oatly and their collaboration with the rapper Gigs. So obviously it's not nature related, but it's a really great use of pop culture. It's genuinely authentic. He actually got slid into the DMs of Oatly and started a conversation about how important Oatly is for him and his son, who are lactose intolerant, and how they find it really hard to find their custard, and it's a big part of their lives. You can't manufacture something like that. But they did bring it to life really well. So it was really authentic. It answered that kind of genuine insight need, and engaged a completely different audience that you might expect Oatly to engage with. Kind of their usual messaging is around climate. It's the climate conscious oat milk flat white drinkers you associate with the brand. And they brought it to life with like a hype beast interview, and there was some really nice creative film and social content that was really, really relevant to the communities that they were targeting through that, and through Gigs' kind of fans and music community. So I thought that was a really great example of using a figure to really tap into a really specific kind of culture and community.
And knowing Oatly, it was probably done with a good dollop of humour as well.
Yes, exactly. Really loads of sort of self-awareness about it. Was really open about the fact that, this isn't a brainwave of someone in the head office or an agency. It was Gigs coming directly to them about this. But the way that they've activated it's felt really authentic and really true to who Gigs is, true to who his fans are, and the people they're kind of trying to reach through it.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I've got some questions from the chat now, and you've both given a bit of an example of campaigns you think that we can learn from. The question is, aside from Jurassic Park, what cultural moment do you think has been the most effective mass audience game changer in the environmental field, and why? So Lewis, I'm going to come to you first, given that you gave first mention of Jurassic Park.
That's a good question. Outside of Jurassic Park, the first thing that comes to mind is David Attenborough. That's the first thing that instantly goes, like just the documentaries produced by David Attenborough, starring David Attenborough. Just the mass audience that watch and rewatch those shows, obviously amazing and worldwide. So that would be my first answer. I don't know if you can think of anything off the top of your head, Sophie, while I'm still thinking.
The one that springs to mind is the turtle straw image, which is about 10 years old now, I think. And there's a lot of challenges with that. It inspired action around one specific thing, which actually is a drop in the literal ocean, and when it comes to plastic pollution and protection of species and things like that. But it really made, I think, people wake up to the realities of plastic pollution, and specifically around plastic straws. And we now live in a world where you can't really find, certainly in the UK, you don't really find plastic straws very much these days. So I think that is probably one that always springs to mind. And then another, which I will caveat that they are a client of ours, but Patagonia's announcement around Earth as the only shareholder, I think that there wasn't like a huge action moment around it, but it really started a conversation around private businesses and their role in protecting nature and fighting against the climate crisis, and how to be a responsible business and what that means. And they've always been very activisty in nature. But I think it's, we're certainly seeing from clients is that people know they'll never be a Patagonia and they don't want to be a Patagonia, but what is their version of that to help, create change in the industries and the sectors that they work in? So less kind of mass public engagement, but the ripple effect it's had, particularly on the private sector, I think has been massive.
Really opened a conversation, didn't it, that moment, and kind of
Yeah.
helped hold a mirror up to other corporates as well, to some degree.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the impact is massive.
Yeah. And we've got quite a few questions in the chat around the theme of budgets. And we've talked about sort of some fairly big campaigns with lots of dollar behind them. So one of the questions is, hearing lots about using influencers and celebs to deliver messages to audiences to bring about change. How do you do that if you've got no budget? What are the no cost options that you can use? Sophie, I'll come to you if that's okay.
Yeah, well, I think what I would say, that influence and celebrities isn't always huge budget, and actually, especially my experience working on public sector and with charities is certainly that case. But we've still managed to engage them in some sort of way, so it doesn't automatically mean huge budgets. But I think, from a PR perspective, it's about finding that kind of hook and reason to believe, both for the public and also media, and that is often a much cheaper way to engage people. So I would say, yeah, if you've got if it's not around, the partnerships that cost a lot of money, is finding what that kind of insight is to inspire action, if you're going to use kind of your more kind of traditional PR media, and trying to activate it through channels like that, which can sometimes be done with resources internally. Sometimes it might be working with sort of agencies, but it's certainly a much cheaper way than, as you say, kind of, looking down the kind of celebrity and influencer route.
Great, thanks, Sophie. How about you, Lewis, from your perspective? What can you do if you've got no money?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of budget, the first thing I came across, or at least got feedback from teachers when I kind of spoke to them about using games and media in the classroom, was, well, the school system's already stressed in terms of budget. What could they even attempt to do? And obviously at the time, I was pitching, oh, you need these 20 different games to teach your curriculum over the course of a year, which 20 times about £40 a game, you're looking at almost close to like £1,000 per classroom, which is obviously just ridiculous to add on to their already stressed budget. Which then started pushing me towards trying to find individual games or individual movies that can offer a variety of different topics or content. And then actually going as far as looking into like video game streamers and people that are playing these games for a public audience anyway, and actually gearing them towards hosting things like charity streams or at least free streams into a classroom, where basically these children are interacting with a streamer, and the streamer's playing the game at literally no cost. It's literally just a time for that person to engage in a classroom.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is, don't let budget or resources kind of limit your aspirations and your ambitions. That there are ways to use mainstream channels, even if you are working on a smaller budget. I'm going to go to a different theme of question now. So this one is around how you use research. The question is, what would you say is the best way to share complex academic research on sustainability to diverse or non-expert audiences? And the questioner poses a concern that either simplifying it or diluting the messaging it could risk diluting the messaging too much. but we do need to think about creative campaigns because sometimes folk can spend up to 10 years creating a report that is never read. So what is the best way of sharing kind of complex research to those non-expert audiences? Lewis, can I come to you first?
It's a good question. Communicating research, I've found, is a very difficult skill, and it's something that I'm always trying to figure out how to do more efficiently. And I think the best people in the business of research in general are very good at diluting that information down. Even if it's all the way down to a single sentence, take-home message style, we're going to make a PowerPoint with 3 take-home messages, but we're not going to do it in a PowerPoint. We're going to do it in whatever format that might be. So it is tricky to communicate research as effectively as it could be. And as you said, yeah, some reports are just too long, even to the point where there are summary reports of reports, and then there are highlights of those summary reports, and then it's just a never-ending distillation of these pieces of information. But the people that do those are incredibly talented at distilling and communicating that information. So the best way to do it, I guess, depends on who's doing it. But yeah, I think it's just a case of trying to not just shout as loudly as possible to try and get the message out, but just trying to engage with as many different people as possible to then use it as a simplified word of mouth is the easiest, like the plastic straw turtle image.
Yeah, something about making something kind of that others can then easily kind of carry the message, isn't it? As it makes it stick, perhaps. Sophie, how about you? What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really echo what a lot of what Lewis has said. I love this because my favorite thing in my job is taking complex information and trying to communicate it in a simple way. A test I often use is if my mum or my dad can understand what I'm trying to say, is people who aren't engaged in the industry and things that I work in. But it's really about trying to, and it's, I understand what you mean, the frustrations around someone working on a report for 10 years, the amount of hours and hard work and effort, blood, sweat and tears that goes into that. And then you've got people like me are like, oh, well, we need to boil it down to 1 sentence to make people care about it. But it will come down to that, especially if you're trying to engage a more of a mass audience. It needs to be read in a sentence, something that they can, that will click with them, that they can remember, and it takes 0 explaining. So it's all about that, and I think it's really important to work with the researchers and the academics to distill what that information is, because also the important information for different groups of people will be different, obviously. So it's about working with them, taking them on the journey, helping them understand that you see the value in the work that they've done, all this work that's gone into creating this 200-page report, and then slowly whittling it down into that kind of sentence, that reason for people to engage and care and believe in what that report is sort of telling them.
Great, thank you. And on that theme of kind of engaging and believing, there's a question here which I'm going to summarize a little bit because it's quite a long one, but sort of a question around, as a sector, we've got our messages and the things that we want to share with the world. Is there a risk in that trying to communicate that to a broad audience via mainstream channels, that we dilute what we're trying to say? Sophie, any thoughts on that?
I mean, yes, there is, but I think that I wouldn't I wouldn't shy away from it because of that. It does, it will be diluted because it does need to be diluted if it's going to engage people. But there's other ways of doing it that isn't just, everyone gets this one broad message. When you're putting together whether it's a campaign or a strategy, it's looking at the audience that you're trying to target. That might be a mass audience, but actually what sits underneath that, what groups can you kind of segment them into to build build out sort of more specific messaging for them, that might be more, more specific messaging that needs less diluting for kind of what you're trying to communicate. But I think if we're, if the ultimate goal is to inspire action, then I think sometimes we have so much we want to say, and we've got there's so many different interesting areas of nature protection and the reasons we think that people should care. We need to boil it down to the reason that they actually will care and communicate it through that, because that is ultimately what will get them to take action and get involved and and do what we're doing.
Thanks, Sophie. And Lewis, what's your take on this one around risking diluting?
Yeah, I think kind of echoing what Sophie said, I think a lot of emotive language in the way to engage people is definitely the way to really get people to care. And really you want to figure out the most direct way to communicate that piece of information. And as Sophie said, you've really got to work hard with people like me who really can't string a sentence together, to try and communicate something more efficiently, as opposed to just throwing a load of, I think someone threw the word jargon and acronyms in the chat, trying to remove that entirely, because obviously people like me and people in academia have inherently kind of assimilated and gained all these completely random words that are just not efficient at communicating information whatsoever. So it's a case of really trying to pick apart which piece of information you really want and what is the best language to communicate that.
Great, thank you. We're nearing the end of our time together now. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to close with a couple of quick fire questions. So one for you first, Lewis. Denmark created a whole country in Minecraft for school kids to explore. What would you build in Minecraft to engage kids with nature?
That's a good question. Wow. I came across, as someone also mentioned, Minecraft education in the chat, and that's like a Minecraft-driven game, more or less, where you play educational resources. And one I came across the other day while talking about it with a student was looking at pre and post deforestation of an area. So looking at how natural and like not specifically an actual real world place, but seeing the impacts before and after humans have kind of come in and really changed the landscape. So I think things around that kind of idea of trying to see what direction we could end up going in if we're not at least acknowledging and trying to make a difference.
Great, thanks, Lewis. And Sophie, one for you. Military films have been really effective in the past in creating those really cool, clear calls to action. How do you think, do you think, and if so, how could we apply these strategies in the context of climate and nature messaging? So we're getting those really clear, actionable messages.
Yeah, so, well, I think, with things like military films, that it plays into some of the sort of, I guess, the human psyche of why people would want to engage in a career in the military and things like that. Whether it, it talks about the kind of sense of pride and, fighting for your country and things like that. So I guess it's about finding what the version of that in nature protection is. Why should people what's going to tap into that human psyche? It's quite general, but I think what's going to type into that human psyche of motivating people to look at that and think, oh, actually that looks like something I want to achieve, or that looks like something I want to engage with. And as I've said, that will be different for different people. But it isn't necessary. I think we can sometimes have because we all love David Attenborough, including people who aren't always engaged in nature protection. But if you look at that as an example, he talks about the protection of the planet and of nature all the time, and we've still got such a long way to go there in inspiring action. So we need to look at how we're what what's going to play into the psyche of people who aren't necessarily engaging with things like that to achieve, I think, what the military films have.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. We've got 1 minute left, so I'd just love to invite you both just to make a quick closing statement or takeaway you'd love to leave our audience with. Lewis, can I come to you?
Takeaway statement. So for me, I'm all about learning and just making sure it's fun at the end of the day. So if you're not having fun, you don't care about it, in my opinion. So have fun.
Amen to that. Sophie, how about you?
I think for me, it would just be think about the end person and of who you're trying to communicate to and who you're trying to, take action or, inspire to get involved in things. Think about what matters to them. It's, because the channels are the vehicle, but it's the people that you're trying to get to, and it's about them. Yeah, so I put them at the center of what you're doing, and then the channel should then hopefully sort of become a bit more obvious to where you should play.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. It's been great spending this lunchtime session with you, and thanks for everyone that's joined. Sorry we didn't get through all the questions, but hopefully we got through a good selection of them. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.